What was the first Gothic cathedral?
The very first Gothic cathedral was the Abbey Church of St. Denis, built near Paris in the 1130s under the direction of Abbot Suger, who wrote about the design and construction of the cathedral in 3 books. The plan was to reconstruct the old Benedictine monastery that housed the holy remains of Saint Denis. Abbot Suger searched Europe for innovative sculptors and masons who experimented with rib vaults and created decorative sculpture. The result was a unified space filled with light, and it served as an inspiration for new religious architecture for centuries afterward.
What is enamel?
Enamel is colored glass that is fired and fused to metal for decoration. One of the earliest forms of enameling, known as cloisonné, was popular in the Byzantine period and in medieval Europe. Cloisonné involves firing enamel into small metal compartments called cloisons, which have been soldered to a metal plate. Then, the entire piece is fired in a kiln to create a jewel-like effect.
How can a slab of stone or a stretched canvas slathered in paint cost so much?
First, art is not only cultural object but also a commodity and is therefore affected by economic factors, such as supply and demand. This might account for the fact that the price of art often rises once the artist has passed away. Second, art is very much a luxury item and therefore a status symbol. The owner of Damien Hirst's $12 million preserved shark, officially titled The Physical Impossibility of Death in the Mind of Someone Living, publicly demonstrates a great deal of wealth. It is perhaps the very fact that art serves no practical purpose that drives up the price.
How can El Greco's paintings appear so modern?
To some, the paintings of El Greco appear more closely related to 19th-century Impressionism or 20th-century Expressionism than the 16th-century Spanish styles of nearly 500 years earlier. His work is characterized by loose brush strokes, often ghostly, elongated figures, and a use of colors in line with the Mannerists. El Greco's real name was Domnikos Theotokopoulos, and El Greco means the Greek in Spanish. Born in Crete in 1541, he worked in Italy before arriving in Toledo, Spain, with the unfulfilled goal of becoming an artist in the court of Philip II. Although the king didn't favor El Greco, he did find many other patrons. His 1586 painting The Burial of Count Orgaz, depicts the soul of the dead count as it rises to heaven, accompanied by an angel, and surrounded by an audience of saints, holy figures, and well-known individuals from Toledo. The figures are pale, ghostly, and white, which contrasts with the bright yellows worn by the clergy and the red fabrics worn by the Virgin Mary in heaven. The painting is arguably similar in style to Italian Mannerists such as Pontormo. And El Greco is considered by some to be a Mannerist painter.
Who was Bernini?
The art of Gian Lorenzo Bernini, 1598 to 1680, defines Baroque style. Bernini was primarily a sculptor, but he also worked as an architect, painter, and poet. His sculpture is exceptionally naturalistic, it lives, breathes, and occasionally screams with life. Bernini was a charismatic player in the upper echelons of Rome's high society who was famous by age 20. He was patronized by popes and aristocrats and was known for his cool confidence. Some of his highest profile commissions include the design for the Baldacchino, a bronze canopy in St. Peter's Basilica, and the Ecstasy of St. Teresa, a marble sculpture in Santa Maria della Vittoria in Rome. Bernini experienced a hiccup in his success when his part of the redesign for the Faggade of St. Peter's Cathedral proved a failure. But his design for the piazza is hailed as an architectural masterpiece.
What is Mughal art?
The Mughals were Muslim leaders descended from Genghis Khan who ruled over the Indian subcontinent from 1526 to 1857. In fact, the word Mughal means descended from the Mongols. At its peak, the Mughal Empire stretched from India to Afghanistan. The classical Mughal period is associated with the rule of Akbar the Great, ruled 1556-1605. During this time, the arts flourished and there was relative peace throughout the empire. Akbar the Great was supportive of grand architectural projects, and was particularly fond of European etchings brought to him by Christian missionaries. His son and successor, Jahangir, supported royal workshops where artists produced immaculate illuminated manuscripts and miniatures paintings.
What is a drawing?
Drawing is a form of graphic art often done in pencil, charcoal, crayon, or ink on paper. Usually, drawings are black and white and feature images composed of lines, however. The definition of a drawing is fairly flexible and has changed a great deal over time. During the early Renaissance, drawings were associated with the fragile media they were made on and were not considered completed works of art. Drawings were used as preparatory sketches and a way for an artist to share ideas with a patron. It wasn't until the later Renaissance that drawings started to stand on their own as works of art.
Who is Mona Hatoum?
Mona Hatoum, 1952, is a Palestinian video and installation artist who was raised in Lebanon and works primarily in Britain. Hatoum's conceptual installations and performance pieces often communicate themes of exile and authority. Examples of her work include the minimalist Socle du Monde, Base of the World, 1992 to 1993. A large black cube that contrasts a metallic interior structure with a softer, more organic exterior embellishment.
What is art history?
Art history is the academic study of visual art. Scholars of art history, often professors, writers, and museum or gallery professionals, are interested in the historical significance of art objects, as well as the meaning of both specific works and the art produced by a particular culture or artist. Art history is traditionally presented as a survey, which is Western in focus and explains art history in a narrative form, with a beginning, middle, and end. Canonical art history texts such as E. H. Gombrich's The Story of Art and Janssen's History of Art carry on this long-standing tradition. While still greatly valued, this narrative presentation of art history is coming under increasing scholarly scrutiny. Some colleges and universities no longer teach art history, and now offer programs in visual studies or visual culture with the goal of offering insights into the visual arts less constrained by the limitations of the Western focused survey.
What are Rajput paintings?
Rajasthan, in northern India, was not part of the Mughal Empire's vast territory. Instead, it was controlled by Hindu Rajput rulers. Painting traditions in Rajasthan were influenced by Persian and Mughal miniature painting traditions and popular subject matter included images of Hindu gods, such as Krishna, and were often romantic and erotic. In Krishna and Radha in a Pavilion, c. 1760, the Hindu god Krishna, commonly represented with blue skin, is caressing his lover Radha, while a yellow bolt of lightning overhead symbolizes their sexual attraction.
What common images are found in Hindu iconography?
Hindu art includes a wide range of images, especially of important deities. The following table explains 4 important Hindu deities and their iconography. Shiva personifies both creation and destruction, embodies all of existence. Has over 1,000 names, is often represented as Lord of the Dance, often depicted as a phallus or pillar. If shown as human, can feature multiple limbs, matted hair, and a crescent moon above the head. Sometimes shown with a third eye and a trident, wears a serpent as a scarf. As lord of the dance, is shown surrounded by a ring of fire. Vishnu, preserver of order and balance in the universe, takes the form of Krishna, a divine lover who battles the demon Kansa, often depicted with blue skin, shown riding Garuda, a large bird. Wears a tall crown and jewelry. Takes many different animal forms including a boar and a tortoise. Can also take the form of Krishna or Buddha. Devi, multiform female goddess worshipped as Parvati, wife of Shiva. Lakshmi, wife of Vishnu, and Radha, lover of Krishna. She also personifies anger as Durga. Takes numerous forms, each with a different identity. As Durga, she rides a lion. Ganesha, son of Devi, as Durga. Worshipped as the remover of obstacles. Shown with an elephant head.
What is Yeoman pottery?
The Japanese Yeoman culture, c. 10,000 to 300 BCE, was a settled hunter-gatherer society with a long-standing tradition of clay pottery. Yeoman pottery from the Middle and later periods are very creative. And the clay was pulled and twisted into unique forms. Animalistic pieces called dagu are likely effigies of the people who owned them, and are highly abstracted. Some have large, heart-shaped faces, long twisting arms, and even markings similar to tattoos.
What is the International Gothic style of painting?
International Gothic is a term used to describe a highly stylized form of painting popular in Europe between the late 14th century and early 15th century, which greatly influenced the art of the Northern Renaissance. It is most closely associated with the art of Bohemia, France, and the Holy Roman Empire. International Gothic styles were less popular in Italy, especially southern Italy. Paintings done in the International Gothic style feature graceful, elongated figures and extensive use of lines. While flat compared to art of the Italian Renaissance, International Gothic paintings do feature more realistic details. Some use of perspective, and an emphasis on setting and landscape.
Who was Alfred Stieglitz?
Alfred Stieglitz, 1864 to 1946, was an influential photographer and gallery owner, who aimed to raise the status of photography to that of painting. Born to a German immigrant family, he was raised in New York City. And he formed a group of New York City photographers called Photographic Succession. With a handheld camera, he photographed the city, capturing sensitive images of a gritty, urban landscape. Stieglitz also photographed cloudscapes, and said that the ever-changing clouds reflected his emotions. Besides his photographic work, Alfred Stieglitz made a significant contribution to modern art through his 291 gallery, located at 291 Fifth Avenue, which promoted European modernism and supported the careers of many important 20th-century artists, including Picasso, Matisse, and Georgia O'Keeffe, who he married in 1924.
What is the international style?
The international style of architecture, sometimes referred to as international modernism, began in France, the Netherlands, and Germany in the 1920s and 1930s. It spread across countries around the globe, but is most associated with Europe and the United States. It lasted until the 1970s as the preeminent modernist mode of building design. The international style was inspired by Cubism, Distillo, and elements of the arts and crafts movement. Architects working within the movement include Walter Gropius, first director of the Bauhaus, Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, Lecor Bezier, and sometimes Frank Lloyd Wright, whose later works were inspired by the international style. Buildings such as Le Corbusier's Villa Savoy, built in the village of Poissy, outside of Paris, France, between 1920 and 1931, reflect the international style's emphasis on flat, rectilinear forms, simple decoration, and open interiors. In 1932, an exhibition called Modern Architecture, International Exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art in New York helped to promote the international style on a large scale, and gave the movement its name. Practitioners of the movement embraced industrialism and mass-produced materials such as stone, concrete, and glass. The style evolved over the course of the following decades to include monolithic glass-covered skyscrapers, such as the Lakeshore Drive Apartments, designed between 1948 and 1951 in Chicago by van der Rohe, and the Seagram Building in New York, 1954 to 1958, also designed by van der Rohe, with Philip Johnson.
What is avant-garde art?
As with many art terms, the word avant-garde comes from French and roughly translates to vanguard. Avant-garde art is art that is on the front lines, and the term can be used to describe any innovative or new modern art. The experimentations of avant-garde artists, writers, and thinkers often cause shock, and even anger, among critics and general audiences. The mid-19th century paintings of Edouard Manet, especially Olympia and Déjeuner sur l'herbe, shocked audiences for their confrontational nudity and manipulation of traditional subject matter. Throughout the late 19th and 20th centuries, waves of avant-garde movements have continued to ruffle feathers and push boundaries. From Monet's Impressionist experimentations, to Cubism, to Duchamp's Fountain, 1917.
What was the Great Bath at Mohenjo-daro?
Mohenjo-daro was an Indus Valley city constructed on a grid plan and made of sun-baked brick. Featuring extensive drainage and plumbing systems. There are records of private bathing areas, toilets, and hundreds of wells in the city, some of the earliest known in the ancient world. The Great Bath was a large, watertight pool built near a citadel and was 39 feet long, 23 feet wide, and 8 feet deep. The Great Baths likely served not only a recreational purpose, but also might have been a place for religious rituals.
What are the symbolic meanings of the many objects in the Marode altarpiece?
The Marode altarpiece is filled with religious symbolism related to the Annunciation. On the table next to Mary are lilies in a vase. The lilies represent Mary's purity, and the fact that there are 3 of them suggest the Holy Trinity. Next to the lilies is a candle. The candle's flame has been recently extinguished and the wick smokes gently. This is a symbol of Christ's incarnation. A small image of infant Christ holding a wooden cross can be seen in the upper left. He flies on a ray of light and has just entered the room through a closed, yet unbroken window, which is a reference to Mary's virginity. In the back of the room is a small, brass basin and washcloth. Symbols of Christ who cleanses the sins of the world. In the right panel, Saint Joseph, Mary's husband, is making mousetraps. This might sound strange, but the activity symbolizes St. Joseph's role as protector of Mary and Christ and shows him as a family man.
What are important symbols in Jewish iconography?
Though idols are forbidden in the Jewish tradition, some images are frequently repeated, especially in the decoration of synagogues and the Jewish holy book, the Torah. Scenes from Jewish history, including the story of Moses, were common choices for synagogues, and can be seen in the decoration of Dura Europo. Important Jewish symbols include the following: menorah sacred, 7-branched candelabrum, shofar, ram's horn used like a trumpet during ceremonies, etrog, citrus fruit used to celebrate Sukkot, a harvest festival, lulav, palm branch also associated with Sukkot in a 6th century synagogue located in ancient Manois. In modern-day Israel, the floors are decorated with Roman-style mosaics, which feature the traditional Jewish symbols mentioned above, along with stylized birds, plants, and animals, which are thought to represent Earth's bounty and the unity of the Jewish people.
What is the Pantheon?
Topped with the widest dome on Earth until the 19th century. The Pantheon is an important example of Roman architecture, built between 125 to 128 CE, during the reign of Emperor Hadrian. The name Pantheon refers to the fact that the temple was dedicated to all of the Olympian gods, who the Romans worshipped as the Greeks had done. The Pantheon was originally built on a podium, like an Etruscan temple, but hundreds of years of development around the site now hide this. Along with the original stairs which led up the middle of the podium. The entrance portico features Corinthian columns and leads to an enormous rotunda. The walls of the rotunda are nearly 75 feet tall and 20 feet thick, which support the enormous dome. At the apex of the dome is a 30-foot oculus, which means eye and allows natural sunlight, and sometimes rain, to pour into the interior of the Pantheon. Besides the engineering innovations needed to build such a wide dome, spanning 143 feet, the Pantheon is impressive because of its harmonious proportions and beautiful decorations. If the dome were doubled, it would form a sphere that fits perfectly within the interior space of the rotunda. The interior of the dome ceiling is decorated with a rows of sunken ornamental squares that create shifting shadows as the sun moves across the sky and light filters through the oculus.
Levi is surprised at this and seems to question Christ with a gesture that indicates, "Who, me?"
Christ is calling Levi, who will become Saint Matthew, to a life of faith rather than sin. Like other work by Caravaggio, the calling of Saint Matthew was shocking, and popular, for its realism and for its juxtaposition of Roman street life with divine, holy figures. One does not usually see Christ walk into a bar, for example. The painting is a good example of Caravaggio's use of tenebrism, an exaggerated form of chiaroscuro with sharp contrasts of dark and light. Caravaggio's style of tenebrism was hugely popular during the Baroque period, and was used by artists from Rembrandt to Zurbaran. The calling of Saint Matthew focuses on a familiar theme for Caravaggio, that of the redemption of even the most sinful souls.
What is a menhir?
In the Celtic language, men means stone and here means long. A translation of menhir is therefore long stone. Menhirs were roughly shaped single stones likely of symbolic importance to the Neolithic people of Northern Europe who made them. An enormous arrangement of these stones, known as menhir alignments, was discovered at Carnac, in southern France, likely made around 3000 BCE. The Neolithic people of the area placed thousands of heavy menhirs in a series of rows nearly 4,000 feet long. The exact purpose of the menhir alignments at Carnac remains a mystery.
Who was Cimabue?
In the Lives of the Artists, Giorgio Vasari describes the 13th century artist Cimabue as the man who shed the first light on the art of painting. He is credited with innovations in naturalism. His art bridges the gap between the flat Byzantine style of painting and the more realistically proportioned style associated with the Renaissance. Comparing the work of Cimabue and his apprentice, Giotto, the difference is clear. Cimabue's panel painting, Virgin and Child Enthroned, c. 1280, depicts the Virgin Mary and Infant Christ surrounded by saints. The work is a blend of Gothic, Byzantine, style and newer Renaissance techniques. The folds of the drapery worn by the Virgin Mary are defined by gold lines. The figures of the saints are elongated and thin. Infant Christ appears to have the proportions of an adult. Despite the flatness and the stylized forms, Cimabue's scene is warm and real. The figures are naturally proportioned and their faces are thoughtful, engaging, and diverse. Giotto's painting of the same scene represents a major shift away from Gothic styles and towards more realistic images of figures and of three-dimensional space. The solid form of Mary's body can be seen through her heavy blue robes, and the infant Christ sits firmly upon her lap. The figures in Giotto's Virgin and Child Enthroned are realistically modeled, and Mary's throne appears to extend back into real space.
What was the Barbizon school?
The Barbizon school was a group of French painters who favored plein air landscape painting that broke with neoclassical conventions of idealization. The name of the group came from the small village of Barbizon where many of the founding artists lived. Artists of the Barbizon school, such as Charles François Daubigny, Jean-François Millet, and Jean-Baptiste Camille Corot, leaned towards realism and valued close observation of nature. Like artists before and after, they searched for truth in the rural countryside of France. Although occasionally criticized, the artists of the Barbizon school, whose work is characterized by softness of forms and loose brush strokes, went on to influence 19th-century French realism and impressionism.
What is the difference between an art museum and an art gallery?
The major difference between a museum and a gallery is that while each is a place that displays art, that art is usually for sale in a gallery but not in a museum. Both museums and galleries play an important civic role in the sharing of art and cultural ideas. Slightly complicating things, however, is that the term art gallery can also refer to a room or a series of rooms in a museum. When walking through an art museum such as the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, one might notice that rooms are referred to as galleries.
What is surrealism?
Like Dada, Surrealism was an early 20th century movement that made a major impact on art and literature between the First and Second World Wars. In 1924, French poet André Breton, 1896–1966, wrote the first Surrealist manifesto in which he called on writers to free themselves from the restrictions of rationality and explore creativity through subconscious means, including free association, dream analysis, and automatic writing and drawing. The word surreal suggests the merging of dreams with reality to reveal a superior, more inclusive reality. Breton credited Sigmund Freud with developing the foundations of surrealism in his studies in psychoanalysis. Key surrealist artists include Giorgio de Chirico, 1888–1978, Max Ernst, 1891–1976, André Masson, 1896–1987, Joan Miro, 1893–1983, Man Ray, 1890–1976. René Magritte, 1898–1967, and Salvador Dali, 1904–1989, among others. The work of the Surrealists is characterized by shocking, often erotic imagery, such as René Magritte's fusion of the nude female form with the face in his oil painting. Elie Wiesel, 1934, and the juxtaposition of surprising, seemingly unconnected elements. For example, Merit Oppenheim covered a cup, saucer, and spoon with fur in her objet. Elie Desgenais and Fourrure, in 1936. Like many other examples of Surrealist art, these disorienting works were inspired by Freudian symbolism and dream analysis.
Who was Suleiman the Magnificent?
Suleiman I, known as Suleiman the Magnificent, 1494–1566. Ruled the Ottoman Empire from 1520 until his death. He was trained as a goldsmith and was a great patron of the arts. Under his rule, ceramics, calligraphy, manuscript illumination, metalworking, textiles, and architecture flourished. Suleiman supported a royal painting society, the Nakashkane, whose styles greatly influenced other artists throughout the Ottoman Empire. A good example of the Nakashkane style is in their design for the Sultan's imperial signature, known as a tughra. It features bold, sweeping lines and ornate organic decoration done in ink and watercolor on paper. It incorporates both abstract design and calligraphy, and includes the name of the Sultan as well as the phrase "the eternally victorious."
What is Romanesque art?
Although the term itself was not used until the 19th century. Romanesque means Roman-like and is used to describe 11th through 12th century medieval art and architecture featuring Roman characteristics. The Romanesque period saw a revival in monumental architecture, sculpture, and wall painting.
What was revolutionary about the Last Supper?
Completed between 1495 to 1498 in the refectory of Santa Maria del Grazie in Milan. The Last Supper is considered by some to be Leonardo da Vinci's greatest work, Mona Lisa. It is a fresco, which means it was painted on a freshly plastered wall. And it depicts the biblical scene in which Jesus Christ breaks bread with his followers on the evening before his death. It was considered revolutionary for a number of reasons, including its naturalism. Da Vinci chose to depict the moment when Christ declares that one of them will betray him. The apostles gathered around the table with Jesus are shocked. Saint John cannot bear it and simply faints at hearing the news. Saint Peter is angered, and pulls out his knife, foreshadowing his use of the weapon when Jesus is betrayed by Judas in a later part of the biblical narrative. For the first time in art history, Judas is shown on the same side of the table as Christ. Though he leans away, betraying his guilt to the viewer. Like other works of Renaissance art, the story is clearly visually articulated. The apostles are organized into 4 groups of 3, and are all aligned on one side of the table. There are 3 windows behind the table, and 3 dark niches along each side. 3 being associated with the Holy Trinity. Despite the shock of the news, the painting is calm and the mood is thoughtful. Da Vinci's Last Supper was a major influence on other artists who painted the same scene, including Tintoretto, Hans Holbein, and Rubens.
What is color?
Scientifically, color is the result of various wavelengths of light perceived by the human eye. The range of colors present in a rainbow, which transitions from red to violet, make up the visible spectrum. In art terms, the word color is interchangeable with the word hue. The primary colors, or primary hues, are red, yellow, and blue. Combinations of primary colors form all other hues. 2 primary colors are blended to form secondary hues such as green and orange. There are even tertiary colors, which are made up of a blend of at least 3 hues.
Why is medieval European painting so bad?
There is no question medieval painting is not particularly realistic. Much of it is simplistic, flat, and lacks natural proportion.
What is magic realism?
First coined in 1925 by the German art critic Franz Roh. Magic realism flourished from the 1920s to the 1950s. Magic realism can be described as a realistic approach 228 to fantastical subject matter. Artists most associated with the style include American artists Yvonne Albright, 1897 to 1983, and Peter Bloom, 1906 to 1992, as well as French artists Paul Delvaux, 1897 to 1994, and René Magritte, 1898 to 1967. Who was probably the most famous magic realist painter, but is usually categorized as a surrealist. The works of these artists are characterized by a sense of mystery juxtaposed with the normalcy of everyday objects.
What are Bisjay poles?
The Bisjay pole is an important ritual wood carving made by the Asmat people of the western portion of New Guinea. The Bisjay pole is a tall, narrow ancestor pole depicting ancestor spirits standing upon one another, and can be approximately 20 feet high. The Bisjay pole plays an important role in the Asmat tradition of head hunting, and is used in ceremonies related to the cycle of life, death, and warfare. The Asmat make the Bisjay pole from sago palm because, according to legends, Asmat ancestors were first created from sago palms by a divine hero named Fumaripitsjay, the first being on earth. This fact emphasizes the Asmat correlation between the human body and the tree. By extension, the human head is symbolically represented as fruit. On the pole itself, carved images of birds eating fruit represent the head hunter who eats the brain of a warrior he has captured. Large, protruding fins at the top of the Bisjay pole are phallic symbols of power and virility.
What is installation art?
Installation art is art that is more than three-dimensional. It creates a complete environment. Entire gallery spaces can be devoted to a single installation, usually but not always temporarily. Installation art became popular in the 1970s and continues to be an important art form today. Installations rely upon the interactions of the viewer/participant and can even be collected, which means they are not necessarily site-specific. Yves Klein created one of the first installations with his work The Void in 1958. For this work, Klein presented a completely empty, white-walled gallery. Other famous examples of installation art include British sculptor Rachel Whitehead's Embankment, 2005, which she created for the Turbine Hall at the Tate Modern Museum in London. The piece consisted of tower-like mountains made of thousands of white, plaster casts of boxes. Visitors to the gallery were able to move through the installation, allowing them to engage with the monumental art form on an intimate level.
What is Internet art?
Artists continually mine new technologies for possible artistic media. From acrylic paints to plastics, electronics to the World Wide Web. Internet art, or net art, is a newly emerging form of digital art and can be interactive, collaborative, and accessible. Internet art is unique amongst art forms for its ability to reach a global audience in the click of a button. In 1995, the website Artei was created as an online gallery hosting virtual art installations by established artists such as Felix González Torres. 1957 to 1996, and Jenny Halzer, 1950, who exhibited her truisms on Artei. Another example of net art includes Russian artist Olia Yelana's interactive piece, My Boyfriend Came Back from the War, 1996, which tells a story by allowing site visitors to click on different hypertext links and GIFs, digital images in graphics interchange format. Internet art continues to expand, with many museums and galleries launching art websites and new digital artists who explore the medium.
What are the colossal heads of the Olmec?
Often considered to be the mother culture of Mesoamerica, the Olmecs flourished between 1200 to 600 BCE in present-day Mexico. The Olmec society left behind no written language, but their monumental art indicates that the culture was highly stratified, with clearly defined social classes. The colossal heads found at San Lorenzo in Veracruz are one of the most recognizable monumental art forms in the Americas. Made of basalt, the colossal heads weigh between 5 and 20 tons each. Up to 8 feet tall, the heavy-featured sculptures have broad noses and thick lips. The heads wear helmets with ear flaps and straps under the chin. Scholars believe they represent rulers or historic figures important to the Olmec culture.
Who was Leonardo da Vinci?
Leonardo da Vinci, 1452 to 1519, is one of the most famous artists of all time. He was the illegitimate son of a Tuscan notary and went on to train in the workshop of master artist Andrea del Verrocchio in Florence. Leonardo da Vinci was a genius, and well known during his lifetime for his intellect and peculiarity. He was fascinated with the visible world, and spent hours drawing what he saw. It was as if for Da Vinci, drawing was a method of understanding. Thousands of Da Vinci's sketches have survived drawings of human faces, swirling water, birds in flight, dissected corpses, the human skeleton, nature scenes, toy designs, and more. He wrote extensively on theories of art and science, creating categories of facial types, explaining techniques of atmospheric perspective, and analyzing the movements of the sun. Da Vinci was hired by Italian governments to design weapons and war machines, including the so-called siege machine. Designs for these weapons appear in sketch form in his notebooks. Despite his prolific writing and drawing, Da Vinci never published any of this work and wrote all of his notes in reverse, rendering his notes readable only when held up to a mirror. It is possible he was paranoid of being declared a heretic by the Church, or that he was simply intensely private. It is clear that Leonardo da Vinci was not merely a painter, but a true Renaissance man. His paintings are among the most famous works of art in the world and include the Last Supper fresco in Milan and the Mona Lisa. Many of da Vinci's works have deteriorated significantly over time.
Who were some of the leading early photographers?
Nadar, 1820–1910. Nadar, or Gaspard Félix Tournachon, was an ambitious French photographer known for portraits and aerial photographs of Paris, and is credited with championing photography as a form of fine art. Julia Margaret Cameron, 1815–1879. Cameron didn't start taking photographs until she was nearly 50 years old. Her portraits featured a soft, diffused light that captured the essence of her subjects. Her goal was to ennoble photography and to secure for it the character and uses of high art by combining the real and ideal and sacrificing nothing of the truth by all possible devotion to poetry and beauty. As quoted in Julia Margaret Cameron Getty Museum. Oscar Ridgelander, 1813–1875. Ridgelander was a Swedish artist who first used photography to aid in his painting. He innovated techniques in photomontage and combination printing, and was interested in both portraiture and allegorical scenes. Matthew Brady, 1823–1896. He was the leading American portrait photographer and journalist whose many famous images include portraits of President Abraham Lincoln and Confederate General Robert E. Lee. Brady organized a corps of photographers, including Timothy O'Sullivan, who documented the horrors of the Civil War. Jacob A. Riis, 1849–1914. Riis was a Danish-American activist and photographer who documented the plight of the poor in New York City in photographs such as Home of the Italian Rag Picker, Jersey Street, c. 1888–1889. He is known as an innovator with his use of the magnesium flash. Edward Muybridge, 1830–1904. Muybridge was an English-born photographer who worked primarily in America and developed an advanced shutter mechanism for the camera that allowed for high-speed photography that could create moving pictures, likely inspiring Thomas Edison in his development of the cine camera. His galloping horse, 1878, captured 12 shots of a running racehorse that changed the way artists depicted such an action.
What is a lamassu?
A lamassu is a monumental stone sculpture famously part of Assyrian palace decoration, and serves as a protector of the palace gateway. A lamassu combines human and animal features and includes a lion or bull body, wings, a human head with full beard and eyebrows, and a total of 5 legs. When approached from the side, the lamassu appears to be walking, and from the front, it seems to be standing firmly at attention. The lamassu from the fortress of Sargon in the Assyrian city of Quraysabad was constructed around 720 BCE and stands over 14 feet tall. Part sculpture and part architectural feature. This giant creature keeps a watchful eye on any approaching palace visitor.
What was the iconoclastic controversy?
During the early history of the Christian Church, there was a debate about whether or not it was appropriate to make representational images in religious art. The term iconoclasm means image breaking, and iconoclasts believed that representational imagery should be forbidden. At the heart of the debate was the relationship between a painted image and the figure being depicted. There was fear of idolatry and a fear that beauty could distract the viewer from the religious sanctity of the figure. It is possible the rise of Islam, and the iconoclastic views of that religion, influenced the Byzantines during the iconoclastic controversy.
What is Las Meninas?
Las Meninas, 1656, is huge, both in its physical size and its significance in the history of art. While at first glance the painting appears to be a simple depiction of the young princess Infanta Margarita Teresa, posing for her portrait, further inspection reveals a much more complicated scene. The petite princess, wearing a white dress and a ribbon in her blonde hair, is at the relative center of the image and is surrounded by her doting attendants and a well-behaved dog. Behind the attendants, a chaperone and perhaps a bodyguard watch over the room. In the far right background, an open door lets light into the space as the Queen's Chamberlain steps in. To the left of the group stands the artist himself, Diego Velázquez. He is poised and confident with his shoulders back, holding his palette for the viewer to clearly see. In front of him is an enormous canvas upon which he is presumably painting the image that we are now seeing. Curiously, just behind the Infanta's head, is a mirror hung on the back wall. Within this mirror, we can see a reflection of the king and queen.
What is the calling of Saint Matthew?
The Calling of Saint Matthew, c. 1599 to 1600, is a highly naturalistic Baroque painting by Caravaggio, one of his most famous and enigmatic. The painting depicts a dark and dingy bar within which a group of young men sit around a table counting money. Suddenly, a beam of light pierces the darkness from the right. A figure of Christ appears, his hand raised much like Adam from Michelangelo's The Creation of Adam fresco in the Sistine Chapel. Christ points to Levi, the tax collector, whose face is covered in divine light.
What is the Bauhaus?
The Bauhaus was a progressive art and design school established in Weimar, Germany, in 1919. With the goal of training art students to create works that blended artistry with commercialism. The school was home to some of the most well-respected and revolutionary artists, designers, and architects of the day, including Paul Klee, 1879–1940, Johannes Itten, 1888–1967, and Vasily Kandinsky, 1866–1944, who lived together on site in the specially designed school. The first director of the Bauhaus was Walter Gropius, 1889–1983. A renowned modern architect known for his interest in function. The courses covered both practice-based art training, on topics such as painting, furniture making, ceramics, bookbinding, metalworking, and eventually architecture, as well as more theoretical concepts including art historical analysis, color theory, and even meditation. Unlike many art schools, the Bauhaus included the applied arts in its curriculum and actively sought out design commissions, with the goal of creating art objects that blended art and craft. Students infused everyday objects with elements of high design. For example, Peter Kaller's 1922 design for a cradle reflects both geometric simplicity and functional efficiency. The politically left-leaning Bauhaus began to lose funding as more conservative policies took hold in Germany during the 1920s. The school first moved to Dessau, and then to Berlin, but was eventually closed in the 1930s as the Nazis gained power. Many of the key Bauhaus leaders and faculty members Walter Gropius, Laszlo Moholy-Nagy, Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, Joseph Albers emigrated to the United States. The Bauhaus embrace of industrialism and its goal of creating functional design made an enormous impact on the art and architecture of the 20th century.
What is the portrait of Lord Packel?
Lord Packel was a powerful Mayan ruler from the ancient city of Palenque, in modern-day Chiapas in Mexico, between 615 and 683 C. Lord Packel and his descendants commissioned a great deal of monumental art and architecture in this Mayan capital. At his death, Lord Packel was laid to rest in a sarcophagus. In his tomb archaeologists found a portrait of the ruler as a young man with a crown of jade and flowers. He is thought to be represented according to Mayan ideals of beauty, which emphasize a long, sloping face and skull, and full lips. Traces of red paint indicate that the piece used to be painted, as was most Mayan sculpture.
What is ancient Egypt?
Ancient Egypt was a powerful civilization in northeastern Africa, which developed along the Nile River around 5,000 years ago and lasted for over 3,000 years. During that long span of time, art in Egypt stayed very consistent in terms of style, form, and subject. Egypt was ruled by powerful dynasties led by a pharaoh. These dynasties are organized by scholars into three distinct kingdoms: the Old, Middle, and New Kingdoms, as well as intermediate periods and a late period, which lasted until 332 BCE. When Egypt was conquered by Alexander the Great. In 30 BCE, Egypt became part of the Roman Empire. Polytheistic religion was an important part of daily life in ancient Egypt, and the pharaohs were considered divine rulers. The art and culture of ancient Egypt greatly influenced other cultures throughout history, and we continue to be fascinated by the culture's richly decorated tombs, pyramids, and other art objects.
What are decorative arts?
Traditionally, decorative arts are objects that serve a function. For example, a jewelry box may be beautifully decorated with intricate metal work, but the box itself is used as a container for jewelry. Fine art, on the other hand, serves no practical purpose and exists for purely aesthetic reasons. Painting and sculpture, for example, are considered fine arts, whereas decorative arts include furniture, pottery, metalwork, jewelry, and some textiles. The line between decorative art, as well as craft, and fine art is increasingly blurry, as contemporary artists and theorists are questioning the significance of function in art.
What is a centrally planned church?
A centrally planned church is a church with the altar at the center, and was often used for baptisteries or tombs. The Church of Santa Costanza is an example of a centrally planned church, featuring a central altar surrounded by an ambulatory. The ambulatory is made up of paired Corinthian columns. The Church of Santa Costanza was originally covered in elaborate mosaics and marble.
What is the difference between the bridge and the Blue Riders?
The Bridge and the Blue Riders were both groups of German expressionist artists who shared artistic values. promoted the symbolic power of color, and believed that art could communicate powerful positive or spiritual messages to the viewer. The bridge, known in German as Die Brücke, was founded in Dresden in 1905 by 4 architecture students. Fritz Blale, 1880 to 1966, Erich Heckel, 1883 to 1970. Ernst Ludwig Kirchner, 1880 to 1938, and Karl Schmidt-Rottluff, 1884 to 1976. Their name came from the philosophical writing of Friedrich Nietzsche. And they shared the philosopher's idea that the present day can positively influence the future, acting as a bridge to the future. The artistic style of the bridge artists was inspired by so-called primitive non-Western art, such as African masks, which they believed was somehow more authentic than Western art. They were also inspired by nature and Russian literature. Key works produced by members of the Bridge include Schmidt-Rottluff's 3 nudes Dune picture from Nidden, 1913, and Kirchner's Street, Berlin, 1913, which depicts 2 prostitutes, one wearing a purple coat, against a bright pink urban background. Der Blaue Reiter, the Blue Riders, was another expressionist group founded in Germany, in Munich rather than Dresden. Members included the Russian painter Vasily Kandinsky, 1866 to 1944, and German artist Franz Marc, 1880 to 1916, who was killed during World War I. Marc was interested in the symbolism of the color blue, and he believed that blue was the most spiritual color. One of Marc's most recognizable paintings is The Large Blue Horses, 1911, which depicts the backs and bowed necks of a group of deeply blue horses as if they are distant mountains against a burnt, orange sky. Kandinsky was inspired by Russian folk art and was deeply interested in art history and philosophy. Kandinsky associated realism with the negative aspects of materialism. And as his career developed, his art became less and less figurative. He explained that he wanted his art to inspire spiritual awareness in his viewers. Kandinsky was also inspired by the 19th-century artist Whistler to give his paintings musical titles such as Composition for 1911, Improvisation 28, 1912, and even Contrasting Sounds, 1924. His work is also thought to be inspired by his synesthesia, a neurological condition in which one can see numbers, letters, or even sound as color. Kandinsky's theories and paintings on the spiritual quality of visual art were extremely influential for modern art. Expressionist paintings from both the Bridge and the Blue Riders made a major impact on 20th century art due to their philosophical goals and interest in expressive abstraction.
Who was Lady Murasaki?
Lady Murasaki was a Heianera lady-in-waiting in the court of Empress Consort Taishi. She was a celebrated poet and novelist and wrote the tale of Genji, considered to be the world's first novel. While Chinese was the official language of scholarship in Korea and Japan, The Tale of Genji was written in Japanese. At 54 chapters, the work included over 400 characters, and told the story of the 84 love affairs of Prince Genji and life at court. 20 chapters of Lady Murasaka's The Tale of Genji survive as illustrated scrolls, likely completed by a team of artists, including a calligrapher. The paintings are muted and refined, with an architectural focus. Figures can be seen indoors from above using a technique of representing invisible, blown-away roofs. Both the novel and the images make a connection between human emotion and nature, and reflect Buddhist ideas of fleeting earthly pleasures.